Welcome to our latest episode of Experts Dispatch. I am Tosif Javed, Research Associate at the Center for Strategic and Contemporary Research, Islamabad. CSCR is a policy organization run by young professionals that research and analyzes issues of significance for civil society stakeholders, policymakers, and government officials. In our Expert Dispatch segment, we regularly interview national and international experts for academia and policy institutes on the social issues relevant to Pakistan. In September this year, AidData, a global development research lab housed at Williams and Mary's Global Research Institute, published a report on China's ambitious foreign development undertaking. The study, which is based on vast new data set that took 4 years to create, has a particular emphasis on China's Belt and Road Initiative (BRI). The research lab documented Banking on the Belt and Road report that gives the reader an overview of China's geoeconomic strategy prior to and during the introduction of BRI in 2013. This report has special relevance for low and middle income countries like Pakistan because it encompasses 13,427 projects across 165 nations totaling 843 billion US dollars. The majority of them belong to the same class. Pakistan entered into the flagship program of BRI, which is currently underway in different parts of the country, commonly known as China Pakistan Economic Corridor (CPEC). Our center has a dedicated study group on CPEC, so it is pertinent for us to understand better the insights reported in this document titled Banking on the Belt and Road. So, we are fortunate enough that today Dr. Ammar A. Malik has joined us in our expert dispatch. Dr. Malik has led the team based at AidData for this project. Before starting our conversation formally, I would like to give a brief introduction of our guest today. Dr. Ammar A. Malik oversees Chinese Development Finance Program at AidData as a senior research scientist. His team creates groundbreaking methodologies for tracking and analyzing underreported financial flows from non-traditional contributor to developing nations, such as tracking underreported financial flows approach that has been opted in this project. Dr. Ammar A. Malik has completed his PhD in public policy from George Mason University, USA, and is currently residing in Virginia. Dr. Ammar, Dr. Ammar, thank you so much for joining us and giving us time to have a discussion on your recent teamwork in the form of Banking on the Belt and Road.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
So, Doctor, could you please tell us how are non-traditional donors like China different from traditional donors like the USA and UK?
First of all, Tosif, what you have to understand is that following the Second World War, the global powers of the time, which are also known as the G7, including Germany, the US, Japan, etc., set up a system of collaboration and coordination around aid projects. So this whole Bretton Woods system as we know it was established in order to facilitate greater coordination as these rich countries basically give aid money to developing countries. It also, excuse me, it also gave rise to a industry known as the aid industry, which supports lots of different contractors, a lot of reporting requirements and rules and norms. Now, when a non-traditional actor like China comes to the foray, they have taken a slightly different approach in how they approach it. China does have an aid program as we traditionally know it, where they give grants and those kinds of technical assistance programs, but that is a very small proportion of the larger development finance portfolio. The larger development finance portfolio is dominated by hard infrastructure spending, which are really big and expensive projects in sectors like transportation and energy. When I mean hard infrastructure, I don't mean childcare services or women's rights or maternal and child health. What I mean is stuff that is physical in nature, stuff that you can touch and has greater implications on economic development. And the other interesting thing about this domination of these sectors is because these projects are so expensive and so large, there has to be more lending or more debt-based financing that is taking place. So I would say those are really the two largest differences. Um, First being the sectoral focus on hard infrastructure, second being the mechanism in which by which the money is being spent. And third thing that we highlight in our report is that if you compare China to the US, the scale of the funding is vastly different. So China is now spending around $85 billion a year on development financing, and that compares to less than 40 billion by the United States. The US has been around the 32 to 40 billion mark for several years, but China has far exceeded it, and it does it mostly through the instrument of debt rather than aid.
Okay, Dr. Malik, my second question is related to what you have mentioned that the hard infrastructure development. How much pumping money in hard infrastructure development like highways, railways, energy projects affect developing countries like Pakistan and big countries like China as compared to investment in social projects like education and women empowerment? What do you say about this?
Well, I think at the heart of this question is a broader or deeper issue, which is around the development model of a particular country. Of course, all countries in the developing world require hard infrastructure. If you look at the amount of highway miles that there are or rail lines that there are in a poor country like Pakistan, as compared to developed countries, you'll see a huge difference. So there's definitely a need for highways. There's need for energy, as we saw in this country in Pakistan 8, 10 years ago. There was a big power crisis, and that was crippling economic growth. So there's no two opinions about it. But what I meant by the development model is you really have to think carefully as a country, as an economy, where you would like to invest first. Is your development going to come from your people? In other words, are you going to invest in your people like the East Asian countries do? And that would generate more economic growth? Or would it be driven by the supply of infrastructure and you expect that that is going to crowd in more investments? I think in the case of Pakistan, the theory was that once we solve the big public sector issues around energy and transportation problem, like the public sector steps up and provides those, that is going to create greater investment, both domestically and internationally. That will lead to productive outcomes in the economy. And once the economic engine starts to grow faster, more people will get employed. Now, that is one way of doing it. But there are other examples where countries did not have as much supply of infrastructure, but they invested more in their human capital, got first-rate health services, educated their people, gave them vocational training, and that in itself led to economic outcomes or improved economic outcomes. So I think these are two different ways of approaching things, and perhaps in reality, both things have to be done in some form of coordination. So I think that would be my answer to your question.
Okay. So, Dr. Malik, as your report talks about hidden debt in the Chinese investment strategy, but as far as Pakistan is concerned, AidData's report didn't uncover any hidden debt problem with CPEC projects. So, is it a green signal for Chinese investment in Pakistan?
Tosif, the first of all, let me explain the definition of hidden debt in our case. Basically what we did was we went project by project in all of these countries that you were mentioning, and we saw what is the amount of contingent liability on the part of the government. So for example, if a power plant is being financed by a Chinese state-owned commercial bank or a Chinese policy bank like China Exim Bank, often the governments which are hosting that project give a sovereign guarantee that we will rescue this project if something goes bad, or in the case of Pakistan, in the energy sector, a purchase agreement, which basically promises the project that we will buy your electricity since the government of Pakistan is the sole purchaser of all electricity. Now, what we did was we basically said, okay, what happens if a day comes when this project has to be rescued by this government? How much debt would this government owe? So we total all of those numbers and compared them with the World Bank's debtor reporting system, which since the 1950s is the official system by which developing countries report their debt obligations or public debt obligations to the World Bank and to the international um, community. And when we did that comparison, we found that there is a gap of about $385 billion between these two numbers. Largest gap in our finding was in Venezuela, 91 billion. I think which reflects both the great involvement that the Chinese have is in Venezuela, but also the lack of reporting from the Venezuelan side to the World Bank, which in itself could be explained by bad relations between Venezuela's government and the West or Western institutions. Now, this is a pretty large number. In the case of Pakistan, though, we found that the debtor reporting system has a larger number than what we found in our data set. So yes, in that by that definition, you're right that Pakistan does not have a hidden debt issue. But having said that, um, we have found so many examples in our report, highlighted in our report, such as the Jakarta Bandung project in Indonesia, where the Indonesian government just bailed out the project by a tranche of $275 million. So what we warn is that this kind of outcome could come to a country like Pakistan. For example, if the dollar keeps devaluing and the repayments of all the energy loans gets higher and higher over time, the Pakistani government is still selling electricity in rupees. So the gap between what we owe to the Chinese creditors and what we can actually make from selling the electricity will increase over time. And there could come a time when the arrears get so high that the government of Pakistan will either have to renegotiate the agreement or come up with some other solution to be able to repay the creditors, because at the end of the day, these are commercial loans. So, long way to say that when you say green signal, it does not, there is no hard and fast rule about what you can and cannot do. We do not currently have a hidden debt problem, but our public financial managers must be very careful in thinking and projecting what kind of money the government will owe to the Chinese creditors in the future before they take on any more large projects.
I see. So, Doctor, what are the popular trends that can be drawn from this report, particularly about the geopolitics and regional order in South Asia?
Well, first of all, you have to understand the context within which this is taking place. This new administration in Washington, the Biden administration, has identified China as the number one strategic competitor for for the foreseeable future, and they have, in cooperation with G7 countries, launched the Build Back Better World initiative, which is being presented. It's in early days now, but it is being presented as a viable alternative to the Belt and Road Initiative. It is based on the principles that Western democracies have espoused over the years, which is protection of the environment or green infrastructure, women's rights, human rights, transparency, etc. They believe that those principles are going to create more sustainable outcomes for developing countries. So if projects do follow these guidelines, that they're much more likely to create better outcomes for their economies. So I would say that it is quite an interesting time to see how these two competing priorities are playing with each other, and it is in the best interest of countries like Pakistan to imagine ways in which they can work with both sides to their benefit. So, for example, if the Chinese side is very good in delivering infrastructure and hard infrastructure and do it quickly, the American side has unparalleled competitive advantage in the area of research, innovation, and university education. So, perhaps there is some ways in which developing countries can work with both sides and get the best of both worlds. But that responsibility does not lie with China or the United States, it lies with developing countries themselves. We have to get our institutional systems working in a way that we can make best use of both sets of opportunities. So I hope that answers your question.
Yes. Doctor, could you please tell us that your report talks about the corruption in overseas Chinese investment? Is this claim evidence based? Because after reading this report, I found that you did a textual analysis. So, don't you think that this report still has room for more clarity in research by adding numerical data to support the idea that there are financial inconsistencies in BRI projects?
So the section that you're referring to in our report is the section where we look at the implementation side of the project. Because we have a major data set that contains about 1.9 million word descriptions of these 13,427 projects, that's about 140 words on average for each project. What we tried to demonstrate was we said, look, this is a data set that we have put out, and we wanted to demonstrate how the data set can be used. We did do a lot of empirical analysis. If you look at our report, it's full of charts and tables and data points which are numeric. But in the implementation section, we tried to demonstrate one particular way in which this data can be used by researchers. And by researchers, I mean not just researchers at AidData or people like ourselves, but people like you and other think tanks around the world who might be able to use our data to make their own findings. All of our data, all of the sources, all the assumptions, the methodology, everything is available on our website. So when you do your own analysis or you read the way that we have analyzed the data, you're absolutely right. You need to raise questions about, why is conclusion being drawn based on text analysis. But our logic was that in the descriptions, which are very detailed and thorough, which are based on evidence, like so, if you look at the data, each row in our spreadsheet is a given project, and it has about 70 variables. And based on our understanding of what happened in that project, we wrote this really detailed narrative descriptions. And then we said, okay, how many times is the word corruption or environmental hazard or labor rights violations, things like that? How many times is that showing up in the description? And it doesn't mean, of course, that we can go and independently verify each and every project and see whether there is actually a case of corruption. Who knows what corruption even means in the context in which that word is being used? So there is definitely a chance that a project might become controversial. It may not actually have a corruption issue, but because it got reported in the media or it was raised in the parliament in a given country, it ended up in our description, it got shown up. But the broader point that we are making by doing this kind of textual analysis is, one, other people can come and do better. We will be very happy if somebody else can use our data to do their own analysis on this. This is only the beginning. Second, it does show at the macro level overall that a large number of Chinese projects have become controversial in one way or the other. So the Chinese side, we've seen, has already started making adjustments. So since 2018, we have seen a major shift that they are not just doing projects that are funded by Chinese financiers only, but they are increasingly likely to include non-Chinese financiers like the ADB or the IFC into their own lending portfolios, which is in a way a reflection on the Chinese side to say we have to hedge our bets, broaden our risk, and get more traditional lenders involved so that the risk of our performance can be lowered, and other standards that these other donors have created over the years can also be incorporated into their lending. Let's say the environmental policies that the UK's FCDO follows are probably more stringent than the environmental standards followed by some of the developing countries that they're lending in. So it's you have to look at this in the broader context. Our intention certainly was to put out a data set, demonstrate some analysis, and put it out there for people to analyze.
Thank you so much for answering this question. Dr. Malik, thank you so much for taking out time for our viewers today. We are
My
really
pleasure.
grateful that you accepted our invitation on such a short notice. We'll be happy to host you in person and learn more from your expertise.
Inshallah. Thank you very much, Tosif, and I appreciate you taking the time to ask these informed questions. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. For those watching this video segment, we shall put the PDF link of Dr. Malik's stellar work so that you can also go through it and can critically evaluate China's development finance activity in the region. This concludes the Expert Dispatch segment. Thank you. Allah Hafiz. Thank you so much, sir.
हाँ जी ठीक हो गया
जी ठीक हो गया. Thank you so much.
वेरी गुड चलें बहुत शुक्रिया
Okay.
यार फिर इंशाल्लाह होती है ओके
Okay.
अल्लाह
Allah
हाफिज़
Hafiz. Allah Hafiz.